This presentation provides guidance and training for LEAs completing the ESSA Consolidated PNP PR 3099 Compliance Report. LEAs will use the ESSA PNP PR 3099 Compliance Report to submit district-wide data on ESSA Equitable Services provided per applicable program to participating PNP schools. LEAs would report compliance during the 2021-2022 school year. This is a screenshot of the eGrant system. The LEA can click on the Compliance Report tab to access the PR 3099 Equitable Services Compliance Report schedule. The compliance report may be found in the eGrant system under the Table of Contents. Within the eGrant system, an LEA can view and print error and warning messages. In addition, it may also print a copy of the report. The ESSA Consolidated Compliance Report resources are located on our webpage. Now, the presentation will move through three parts of the PNP Compliance Report. Part 1, Private Nonprofit Program Participation. Part 2, Program Compliance Self-Check. And Part 3, the additional information that is optional. There are several reminders for LEAs regarding the PNP Compliance Report. Documenting overall compliance for a program requirement may require several forms of documentation to be maintained locally and available upon request by TEA and/or an auditor. The compliance items listed are a selection of program compliance requirements for compliance reporting purposes and not an all-inclusive listing of all the requirements for a particular program. For a complete listing of all the program compliance requirements, the LEA may review the program-specific and ESSA provisions and assurances. Part 1 of the PNP Equitable Services Compliance Report collects data on the number of private nonprofit PNP schools within and outside of district boundaries and participating students per program. Under Part 1A, Total Schools Within Boundary, for Part A1, type the total number of PNP schools located within school boundaries. This total should also include PNP schools that are not participating. In Part A2, if the district received Title I Part A funds, for example, type the number of eligible PNP schools that students attended outside of district boundaries. This number would only include LEAs receiving Title I Part A funds that provided equitable services to students in eligible PNP schools. Part 1B, did PNP schools participate? Indicate yes or no for each program area if one or more PNP schools participated during the compliance report grant year. If the LEA clicks no across all programs, The Part 2 Program Compliance Self-Check section collapses since the LEA has no eligible PNP schools participating with equitable services. Under Part 1C, type the total number of participating PNP schools that received equitable services for each program area. And in Part 1D, type the total number of eligible PNP students that received equitable services for each program. Part 2 is the program compliance self-check portion of the compliance report. The LEA will complete this section to indicate compliance with each requirement. For this year, there were 4 program compliance self-check items selected in which the LEA must submit data. Number 1, timely and meaningful consultation. Number 2, the LEA maintain control of PNP inventory, technology, equipment, and supplies. Number 3, the LEA maintain documentation of equitable services amounts. And number 4, the LEA had documentation of equitable services administration amounts. If the LEA clicks No across all programs in Part 1B, the Program Participation section, the Part 2 Program Compliance Self-Check section collapses since the LEA has no eligible PNP schools. Program Compliance 1 requirement. The LEA conducted timely and meaningful consultation with participating PNP school officials regarding the implementation of the ESSA programs. The consultation must occur prior to the LEA making decisions that affect opportunities of eligible PNP school students and staff. If compliance has been met for the Title I Part A program, click Yes to indicate the LEA complied with this requirement. By selecting Yes, the LEA assures it has documentation showing compliance readily available upon request by TEA and/or auditors. Examples of the strongest documentation recommended are listed: agendas, meeting minutes, emails, attendance sheets, sign-in sheets, or other documentation of timely and ongoing consultation. An LEA may have other documentation readily available that might show compliance. In the event of an audit, TEA or audit staff would make the final determination if documentation meets the compliance requirement. If No is selected, use the space provided to describe how the LEA plans to meet compliance the following year. Program Requirement 1. The LEA conducted timely and meaningful consultation with participating PNP schools regarding the implementation of the ESSA programs in Title I Part C, Title II Part A, Title III Part A, Title III Part A Immigrant, and the Title IV Part A program. Again, if compliance has been met for these programs that are participating, click Yes to indicate the LEA complied with this requirement under each applicable program. By selecting Yes, the LEA assures that it has documentation showing compliance for each program readily available upon request by TEA and/or another auditor. If No is selected for any of these programs listed, use the space below to describe how the LEA plans to meet compliance the following year. Program Compliance Requirement 2, the LEA had procedures in place ensuring it maintained control of PNP inventory and supplies purchased for the Equitable Services Program. If compliance has been met for the Title I Part A program, click Yes to indicate the LEA complied with this requirement for each applicable program. By selecting Yes, the LEA assures that it has documentation showing compliance readily available upon request by TEA and/or an auditor. Examples of the strongest documentation recommended for each program are written LEA procedures that ensured it maintained control of technology, equipment, and supplies purchased with the Private Nonprofit Equitable Services Program. If No is selected, use the space provided to describe how the LEA plans to meet compliance the following year. This continues with Program Compliance Requirement 2. The LEA had procedures in place ensuring it maintained control of PNP inventory and supplies purchased for all of the applicable Equitable Services programs, Title I Part C, Title II Part A, Title III Part A, ELA, Title III Part A Immigrant, and the Title IV Part A programs. By selecting Yes, the LEA again assures that it has documentation showing compliance readily available upon request by TEA and/or an auditor. If No is selected, use the space provided under each program to describe how the LEA plans to meet compliance in each of those programs the following year. Program Compliance Requirement 3. The LEA documented the equitable services amounts used and provided a detailed explanation of the equitable services amounts provided to private nonprofit officials for all applicable participating programs. If compliance has been met for the Title I Part A program, click Yes to indicate the LEA complied with this requirement for each applicable program. By selecting Yes, the LEA assures that it has documentation showing compliance readily available upon request by TEA and/or an auditor. Examples of the strongest documentation recommended for this requirement are documentation LEA informed the PNP school officials of fiscal requirements that include equitable service amounts for one private school campus. For example, agenda, meeting minutes, LEA program summaries, timeline of professional development travel and PNP purchase requests, calendar of program services with equitable services amounts, or other documentation meeting requirement, or documentation and LEA shared calculated equitable service amounts by program for one PNP school campus. For example, LEA calculations by PNP campus and program level, calculation formulas per PNP campus, etc., or written procedures and documentation that provided verification or tracked LEA PNP inventory purchases that include equitable services amounts for one private school campus. The LEA may have other documentation that might potentially show compliance. In the event of an audit, TEA or audit staff would make the final determination concerning whether the documentation is sufficient to demonstrate compliance with the program requirement. If No is selected, use the space provided to describe how the LEA plans to meet compliance the following year. Continuing with the same Program Compliance Requirement 3, that the LEA documented the equitable services amounts used and provided a detailed explanation of the equitable services amounts provided to PNP officials for all applicable participating programs: Title I Part C, Title II Part A, Title III Part A ELLA, Title III Part A Immigrant, and Title IV Part A. The Program Compliance Requirement number 4 is the LEA documented the equitable services administration amount used and provided a written explanation to all applicable participating programs. If compliance has been met for these programs, click Yes to indicate the LEA complied with each requirement for the participating programs. By selecting Yes, the LEA assures that it has documentation showing compliance readily available upon request by TEA and/or an auditor. The LEA's strongest documentation recommended is the documentation LEA informed PNP school officials during consultation of equitable services administration amount and how it was used. For example, agendas, meeting minutes, third-party shared service agreements, calculated campus spreadsheets, etc. The LEA may have other documentation that potentially might show compliance. In the event of an audit, TEA or audit staff would make the final determination concerning whether the documentation is sufficient to demonstrate compliance with the program requirement. If No is selected, use the space provided to describe how the LEA plans to meet compliance the following year. If the LEA did not use any administration amounts for applicable equitable services in a program, the LEA should click Yes and type administration amounts were not used for PNP equitable services in the comment box. Program Compliance Requirement number 4. The LEA documented the equitable services administration amount used and provided a written explanation to all applicable participating programs. So again, the LEA would indicate for Title II Part A, Title III Part A, ELA, and Title III Part A Immigrant if it is in compliance, or if not in compliance, it would use the space below to describe how the LEA plans to meet compliance the following year. For Part 3, LEAs may type any additional information that is applicable to the PR 3099 PNP Equitable Services Compliance Report in the comment box below, if desired. Support for assistance. The PR 3099 PNP Compliance Report resources are Schedule Mockup, Program Compliance Self-Check Guide, Instructions Document, and Instructions Video. PR 3099 PNP Equitable Services Compliance Report resources may be located on the TEA webpage under Federal Program Compliance Division. On the ESSA Consolidated Compliance Reports resources page, an LEA can find a PDF copy of the PNP Compliance Report, the PR 3099 Schedule Mockup, Compliance Report Instructions, and the instructional video. LEAs may reach out to their local ESC staff who are available to provide technical assistance and support prior to submission of the PNP compliance report. ESC staff are also available to provide technical assistance to any LEA that reported not in compliance for any of the compliance self-check items. The purpose of the technical assistance would be to assist the LEA in meeting compliance the following year. (2023) statewide virtual training sessions. Applicable statewide virtual training sessions that have occurred in 2023. First, let's make a deal. An LEA's provision of providing equitable services, ongoing consultation meetings, and shared collaboration with participating private nonprofit schools. That session occurred on June 1st, 2023, and you may locate the slides, the frequently asked questions, and the voiced over PowerPoint at the link on the slide. The LEA ESSA Consolidated Grant Application presented by the Grants Administration Division occurred on June 6, 2023. You may find training materials for this particular session at the link in number 2. LEAs may also reach out to the private nonprofit ombudsman for support with the compliance report. The PNP Ombudsman Program contact information is shown. Feel free to reach out if there are questions. Thank you for attending this presentation.